Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami. United States President Donald Trump, who has repeatedly offered for mediation for the resolution of Kashmir dispute, has said India has never had a better friend in White House than him. While he shared the stage with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Houston, he vowed relentless unity against terrorism. And on the contrary, outside the stadium where they were sharing the stage, Kashmiris, Hindus, Muslims, Dalits, Sikhs and Christian groups under the umbrella of Alliance for Justice and Accountability held anti-India demonstrations and rallies for human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. The curfew and the complete communication blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered the 50th day. The occupied valley has witnessed the wrath of the Hindutva mindset, particularly after its special status was snatched by the BJP-led government. The extremism against the minorities in India, and particularly Muslims, has also increased. To talk more about all this, we have been joined by Dr. Tahir Kamran, historian and head of the Liberal Arts Department, BNU, in our studios in Lahore, Mr. Rajiv Desai, an analyst from Delhi, and Mr. Khaled Faik, a Kashmiri author and engineer by profession, joining us from Doha. Thank you all very much for being part of the Newswire today. I will start the discussion with Dr. Tahir Kamran. Dr. Kamran, how do you see this statement by President Trump that India has never had a better friend in the White House other than him?
I think President Trump has no consistency at all. So I will not be surprised if tomorrow he will change his tone and tenor and the content of his statement at all. But having said all that, both Narendra Modi and Trump, they have certain commonalities. They have very little consciousness or clue for whatever is unfolding internationally. So their agenda is absolutely nation-centric or community-centric for Narendra Modi. Previously, whosoever came in the White House, he has a political background. He has served with at some position in government of the United States. So Mr. Trump was exception to that norm. Therefore, whatever Trump is saying, I think, it doesn't have any credibility because he changes. He wears like a weathercock. He changes his statements far too often, and then he doesn't have any consciousness or clue of the international happenings all around.
I'll go to Mr. Khaled. Mr. Khaled, how do you see that when Mr. Trump was sharing the stage with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he should have rather reminded him of what exactly he was doing over there in Indian-occupied Kashmir? Today, it has been a 50th day that the Kashmiris are under consistent lockdown and there is a complete communication blackout. And when President Trump talks about fighting a war against terrorism, shouldn't he have reminded Indian Prime Minister of his terrorist activities which are underway in Indian-occupied Kashmir?
I agree with the panelists who spoke before me. And as you remarked, as we speak, it is the 50th day of the military siege in Kashmir. There is a complete communication blockade, and this current lockdown, I believe, seems to have a genocidal intent. And it is an attempt to make Kashmiris surrender their right to have political and civil rights. This current imposition of unilateral imposition of Article 350A and subsequently the Article 370 of Indian Constitution makes Indian presence in Kashmir military occupation, nothing less or nothing more, as per the relevant international laws and treaties. Yeah, Donald Trump, as a president of the world's largest economy and as well as the most powerful nation on the planet Earth, should have reminded him, which was under his jurisdiction of the duties, that he should have reminded of him that the violation of human rights and whatever is going on in the dominion that is Kashmir is unconstitutional and doesn't go down with the human rights, in the planet. The fact of the matter is they both have a similar background. They both share a lot of commonalities, as a person who spoke before me. The fact of the matter is that Kashmiris have given up hope from these people. We really don't care what they say or what they do not say, because all they want to see is their own benefits. Nobody cares
they
about
want to see their own benefits.
anymore.
Mr. Khalid, I'll come back to you. Mr. Desai, the discrimination towards minorities has been on the rise, particularly when we see that BJP government came into power when back in 2014 as well, and this time around with a bigger majority. So how do you see the minorities in India? Do they feel their identity and their existence at stake after the BJP government has particularly locked down Kashmiris and have held them under subjugation?
Well, critics in India have said that Mr. Modi's government, the pursuit of their majoritarian sort of agenda, where Hindus are 80% and everybody else is 20%, that has let loose a series of fringe groups, and not even so fringe also anymore, who have visited all kinds of atrocities on minority groups, minority individuals, and so forth. So there is some truth to that. The government is an advocate of Hindutva, which is the majoritarian ideology, and that has given comfort to a lot of these groups, Hindutva groups, to go out and do as they please, which is precisely what they've done.
Okay, Ms. Desai, I'll come back to you about this particularly. How did this Hindutva mindset actually evolve in India? Mr. Kamran, could you please shed some light on how basically Hindutva ideology took its shape, and could you give us a glimpse of the history of Hindutva?
Well, it was in 1920s that for the first time Hindutva was, this particular terminology of Hindutva came in wider currency, not wider currency, but it came into currency. It was being deployed by Savarkar and Hedgeworth. In fact, as a result of the British colonialism, there had been reform movements in all the communities and all the nationalities. So Muslims have this Anjuman-e-Himmat-e-Islam, Hindus have this Arya Samaj, Sikhs had this Sangh Sabha. So that was the basis of Hindutva, which came to the fore in 1920s as a result of the proselytization of Christianity and the supremacy of the Western power. So every community tried to redefine itself, and some Hindus in southern India, and Hindutva or Savarkar was from Nagpur, so they try to reinvent themselves in the light of Hindutva, and they try to see Hinduism as a monolithic ideology, which Hinduism in fact is not. Hinduism's historical basis, as we understand in northern India, had been in the movement led by Kabir and his associates, which is called Bhakti movement. So, but it was a recreation or refoundation or reinvention of Hinduism in the light of monotheistic, monolithic ideologies, which they must have imitated from the Christian missionaries. And then all of a sudden we saw that they started to idealize Adolf Hitler. And, it was RSS as well as from the Muslim side, Khaksar movement, they idealized Adolf Hitler.
We'll discuss this correlation of the fascist ideology and the Nazi ideology and this very Hindutva ideology. Mr. Desai, how do you think over the number of years or number of decades, when we read about the ideology of Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, they believed in equality, they believed in non-violence, and they also believed in the truth power. how do you think the society in India has transformed over the number of decades from that ideology to Hindutva, and that led to the victory of BJP government in forming the government over there?
Well, I really don't see that the rise of Hindutva is parallel. There may be some change in society of that nature, but I don't think that it's a generic kind of a change of mindset of the vast majority of the population. I do think that, in fact, a lot of this, there are two, if you look at the United States, you look at India, Mr. Trump came and has sort of played the card that's most people call white nationalism, and Mr. Modi and company have played the card that's Hindu nationalism. But I think even that, at least in the Indian case, is not 100% true, because I think what these people, what critics have said, that this government and this party is all about winning elections, is all about electoral advantage. And so everything falls by the wayside. So a really a big deal like the Houston show with Mr. Trump and all of that, it's all seen by many people who have a rational view and logical view of things as an over-the-top kind of propaganda event that has very little to do with any reality. So I don't think that,
as you said, that it doesn't actually show the larger mindset of the society over there, India, but the recent poll results suggest that BJP government, and it also follows a certain mindset, it had the landslide victory. So it is, India turns out to be the largest democracy in the world as far as the number of voters are concerned. So how do you see the voters went into vote for this particular party? So how do you differentiate? Didn't have they in their mind that this particular party has a certain mindset which is very extremist?
Oh, I think the appeal of Hindutva is an appeal to a chip on the shoulder. You know, there are a lot of people in India, one way or the other, who miss the bus, whether it's an economic, academics, the professional world, and so forth. And so they to them, music, this is music to their ears, that these people, the English-speaking people, the Western-oriented people, the educated people, the more privileged people, are all getting their comeuppance under this present government. This is what critics say. I personally think that, I wouldn't, while yes, there is definitely a significant impact that this majoritarian ideology has had for the reasons I just described, I still think that if they have to continue to manipulate public opinion, if they have to continue to stage all these events to get away from the norms of accountability and so forth, I really wonder where it's all going to go in the end, because at some point they will have to answer.
So, Mr. Desai, you just mentioned that they happen to mold the public opinion. What are those methods of this particular mindset that they actually adopt in order to mold the opinion? What are those popular methods? Are these the retelling the story of the ancient Hindu glory?
Part of it, but that's laughable. I think their real appeal is, it's a sort of a get even, get even kind of thing. So it's a generalized distaste and dissatisfaction with things as they are, and these are the people who crowd under this saffron umbrella. And that's, it's about the total vote that went to them is about 37%. It's a significant amount, but nevertheless, it's not a vast majority. 63% did not vote for them. But they have a way and using of propaganda and events to even cut into that 67%. And so, at least in the past election, we've seen that a lot of other parties ended up supporting him. In fact, in Kashmir as well. They got in because the local party supported them, and now they're all locked up. So I think it's a manipulative kind of approach to politics that we're seeing. rather than an ideological approach.
So this is a manipulative sort of an approach. Okay, Mr. Kamran.
Well, I tend to agree to a certain extent with Mr. Desai, but if things are to be kept in perspective, the plurality that India represents in its political system, in its social system, in its history, and that plurality and diversity was its biggest strength. So that diversity is in jeopardy now under Narendra Modi, and that is the biggest problem, and that is the biggest criticism which is being unleashed by various scholars and academics all around. And then Nehruvian vision. Gandhi said so many things, and his focus was on the villages of India. And he wanted to rediscover the pristinehood of India. And Gandhi was a remarkable philosopher who had imbibed various influences from Tolstoy, from Ruskin, from Thoreau. But the modern India was the vision of Nehru. And Nehru, the Nanda's biography of the Nehrus, and that there's a remarkable quote when Jawaharlal Nehru once said that I am Indian by nature, I am Muslim by culture, and I am Brahmin by an accident of birth. So he could appreciate Urdu poetry. He could he wore really a Muslim attire.
Okay.
But that vision, that of a Nehru.
So we'll come back to this one. And
the last thing, the Nehruvian vision, it could not sustain itself, unfortunately, and that's the failure of a Congress government, Congress government after Indira Gandhi, and particularly Narasimha Rao, the way he operated. The Congress became a caste party, Brahmin, and they couldn't move out of that Brahminhood, and that was the biggest flaw in the politics that was adumbrated by Congress.
Mr. Kamran, the point well taken. Mr. Desai, what are these extremist elements so deeply obsessed with the oneness or the unity of the Indian subcontinent?
You cannot change the diversity of India. There will always be Muslims, and there will always be Christians, and there will be always Buddhists and Dalits and all kinds of people. The question is about their representation in the political system. And that has to do with a diversity of views being expressed out of public platforms like media, mass media, and whatever others in the academic world, in the professional world. I think that is where the diversity issue should be worrisome, because if as critics have noted, this government does not have a lot of tolerance for a diversity of opinions and views, then there might be a problem. As far as the actual diversity of religion, of caste, and all of that, gender, that's there. Nobody can change that. It's a matter of how it's represented and how it's treated, which is why one of the biggest criticisms of this government is that it manipulates the mass media, so no other views can get represented.
Okay, Mr. Rajiv Desai, very much joining on the Newswire analyst, joining us from Delhi. Mr. Khaled Faik, how do you think society works when a certain extremist ideology has taken over all the ranks and there happens to be no recognition of plurality and the respect for diversity?
The very basic fact of this kind of ideology is that, unfortunately, the regime that runs through it doesn't like the idea of being questioned. There is a huge chasm between the real rights that you have been given by a sanctified constitution and what has been given to you. So there is a lot of chasm between these two things. It violates the basic laws that has been given to the citizens of that country. Today we see that slowly the country is turning into a capocracy rather than being a democracy. The fact is, we are being subjected to it, and the whole population is being, taken in a direction where they don't believe in facts. They always rely on the propaganda, and that is, unfortunately, that is state-sponsored.
So, Mr. Kamran, as both of the parties have mentioned, that it is the propaganda or the manipulative tools that the BJP actually uses in order to mold the public opinion. How do you see that?
That's right. I 100% agree with that, and I will take that argument a bit further. When we say people articulating this view that India's diversity is not going anywhere, my question is that when Hindu Rashtra is being talked about, so if India becomes Hindu Rashtra, then what will become of those minority groups? What will become of Dalits, Muslims, Christians? And then historically, Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb or Ganga Jamni civilization is essentially a Muslim civilization, and it has contributed in the culture of India, so discounting that fact, discounting the special status of Kashmir, it means that you're bent upon creating a Hindu Rashtra. That's the biggest of my worries, and then, of course, if you listen to their anchors, Arnab Goswami and rest of the people, they're so blatantly jingoistic in their tone and tenor that one starts shuddering with fear. That if some untoward incident happens, then South Asia has 2 atomic powers, nuclear powers. What will become of the world? So that needs to be thought about by Mr. Trump, Narendra Modi, and rest of the people who, by a sheer stroke of destiny, and good luck to them that they have become the leaders of their countries. Otherwise, I have strongest of my doubts that they have the caliber to lead their nations.
Mr. Khalid, how do you think the international community should play its role in order to diffuse the tension in this particular region?
Yeah, there is a lot of onus on the international community around, more or so on the South Asian nations who enjoy that kind of a position that they can diffuse the situation. But today we are seeing that the entire community, not only the community, I beg your pardon, but the whole South Asian countries are so divided in their own conflicts and their own animosities that nobody doesn't seem to care about a region that is a potential nuclear flashpoint. The people of Kashmir today are caught in a tug of war between the 2 nuclear powers, and it can destroy the entire peace in the South Asia and subsequently the entire world. The fact of the matter is, the international community should come forward and should put a strong foot on this matter, that to diffuse this tension between the 2 countries and lead the nation, lead the. We owe this. They owe this to their future generations. We can't let this conflict, keep lingering around and engulf generations after generation. Let me remind you, this is the 5th generation that is being given its blood for the restoration of the sovereign democracy in Kashmir. And today what we are seeing is India's illegal power grab is turning Kashmir into a constitutional colony.
Yeah, generations and after generations are giving sacrifices for their right to self-determination in Kashmir. Mr. Khaled Faik, an analyst and engineer by profession, joining us from Doha, and Mr. Tahir Kamran, historian and the head of the history department at BNU. Thank you for joining in to the show today. Here we take a short break, and after we return from the break, we'll be joined by another esteemed panel of analysts to talk about the rising tensions in the Middle East and the U.S. role after the 2 Saudi oil installations were hit. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Newswire. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he has no plans to meet the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, but he is open to hearing his Hormuz peace initiative at the United Nations General Assembly. Earlier, President Rouhani has said he will present an initiative for regional cooperation to ensure peace in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian Foreign Minister Jawad Tehami has said President Rouhani was willing to meet Trump in New York, provided that President Trump is ready to do what's necessary. Tensions between the two countries escalated after 2 major Saudi oil installations were hit, affecting the global energy markets. Iran denied the responsibility. However, Yemeni Houthi rebels claimed the attacks. Saudi officials have pointed fingers at Iran and have warned of an appropriate action against Iran if attacks are proven against it. On the other hand, Houthis have offered a ceasefire with the Saudi-led coalition, which has been welcomed by the UN. What is happening in the Middle East and how severe is the threat of a war there? To understand this, we are joined by Mr. Nader Hashmi, an analyst on Middle East affairs from Doha, Mr. Mostafa Khoshcheshm, analyst from Tehran, and Mr. Khaled Al Maeena, former editor of Arab News and Saudi Gazette. Thank you all for being part of this show today. I will start with Mr. Khaled Al Maeena. So when the Yemeni Houthi rebels have offered for a ceasefire, how has it been received in Saudi Arabia?
I mean, technically and publicly, I mean, any call for peace will be welcome, because as all sides have admitted to one thing and have agreed on one thing, that the war in Yemen is now contributing to a lot of bloodshed, misery, starvation, and deprivation. So any sincere call for peace by any side would be welcome. But let me tell you one thing. The problem in Yemen is a quagmire. I mean, people say we're having peace. The next day there are rocket attacks, there are firings and all. So there has to be a confidence mode set up, and there have to be people who are assigned to deal on behalf of the Houthis, because as an observer, and I like to observe things, you find every day some new person speaking on behalf of the Houthis. So I think they have to rally around and then say, we would like to have peace under the aegis of the United Nations or any other organization that can make this possible.
The UN has welcomed this offer by the Houthi rebels. How do you think the UN can play its role to get a ceasefire and bring the two warring parties to the negotiating table?
I think the United Nations should have both the sides come, as you said, to get to the table, but there should be an agenda that people should spell out what they want. At the same time, I mean, there is also inner fighting in Yemen between the Yemenis themselves. You know, I mean, now the sad incidents in the south of Yemen, Hadramaut, Aden. So unless there is a concerted effort by the Yemenis, no one has the safety and the concern at heart of the Yemenis, of Yemen, other than the Yemenis. But it's very unfortunate they themselves are divided, and as such, I mean, these kind of activities by the Houthis, throwing of bombs, attacking people, and on the other side, the others attacking them in Yemen, create a climate of really terror and non-confidence.
Okay, Mr. Khalid, I'll come back to you. Mr. Hashmi, how do you think that any ceasefire offer which has been put forth by the Yemen's Houthi rebels, if this ceasefire offer is accepted by the Saudis, do you think it can lead to a broader easing of tensions in the region?
Yes. Obviously, a precondition for peace in Yemen is first and foremost a ceasefire. But the real challenge is what comes next. And I don't think that the key parties to the Yemen dispute can solve this problem by themselves. In other words, the internationally recognized Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels, they won't be able to solve this conflict by themselves unless their regional and international supporters are also part of a peace settlement. And so what I'm suggesting here is that the only way forward to resolve this horrific conflict in Yemen, which the UN has described as the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet today, is for some serious leadership from the international community. I think the big problem here actually is the Trump administration, which is still strongly backing and refuses to change its policy with respect to American support for the war effort in Yemen. So unless that changes, I can't see this logjam being cleared that would open a way toward a peace settlement. I think that's the sticking point.
Okay, Mr. Nader, we'll come back to the role that U.S. can play and is already playing, and the statements coming from U.S. President Donald Trump, which happen to be contradictory. We'll come back to that. Mr. Mostafa, how do you see if Saudis accept this ceasefire offer by the Houthis, and do you think that there would be it would be ample enough to appease Iran?
Well, it doesn't matter if Iran would be appeased or not, because Ansarullah movement is an independent movement that works in its own interest and in the interest of the country or that part of the country. As a matter of fact, a ceasefire would be very much necessary, as my colleagues stated earlier. And first and foremost is pressuring the to respect the ceasefire. As Mr. Hashmi stated, there was an attack on Hodeidah which violated a UN-enforced ceasefire over the Hodeidah airport, the Hodeidah port, and that could have jeopardized the whole process in that port. The first and foremost is a ceasefire, and of course, the siege has hurt millions of people that are suffering starvation. There needs to be international moves to aid these people with medical health and assistance, as well as foodstuff needs to be taken to the community. And also, there needs to be some kind of comprehensive talk, since it's now a while that we could see there are other wars also on the way in the southern parts of Yemen as well. So some internal problems needs to be, resolved first in that part of Yemen. But all in all, peace is good, is welcome, not just by the Yemenis themselves, but I believe by the entire regional nations that want to see an end to this endless war and meaningless war.
Mr. Mostafa, President Hassan Rouhani has said that he is going to present a peace plan for the Strait of Hormuz and Gulf. So he hasn't given any details regarding that peace initiative. It is going to be announced at the United Nations General Assembly session. So what is the likelihood? What are those focus areas do you think he would be including in that peace plan?
Well, this new offer is nothing actually strange. It was already stated. It's a long strategy, an old strategy that has been reiterated by Iran for quite a long time, believing that the regional nations should maintain and protect and promote regional peace and stability in the region. And the outside powers, the trans-regional states like the United States, they are the root cause of chaos and instability in the region, believing that free voyage and shipping and trade in the Persian Gulf and in the Strait of Hormuz, was on the way before the U.S. deployed in this part of the world, along with its agenda against Iran to fight off alleged Iranian threat. They have feared instability in the region. So Iran believes that regional security as well as stability should be protected by those that are living in this part of the world, including Iran and the Arab states on the opposite side of the Persian Gulf. They should work out their differences and try to protect security in this part of the world without foreign meddling and without the United States military buildup and the negative role that it plays in this waterway.
Mr. Mostafa, you've just mentioned that it is going to the most crucial part of this peace plan could be that the regional countries can solve their own problems, and the presence of the foreign forces in the region actually poses a threat to the regional security and even the oil industry, as has already been said by President Rouhani. Mr. Nader, how do you see President Trump's statement regarding this peace plan, which is to be presented by President Rouhani? He has said that he has no plans to meet Iranian president. However, he is open to hearing this particular peace plan.
You know, we're living in a very strange and chaotic and confusing world. The irony of what Trump has been saying with respect to Iran recently puts him in a position where he is actually the more moderate sort of restraining voice with respect to U.S. foreign policy in the region. No one would have thought that. And of course, his statements of today and of the previous several months that he wants to meet with the Iranian head of state, he wants to have a dialogue, he wants to negotiate, of course, is deeply a voice in a position. But I think on balance, it's actually a position that is helping us prevent a more wider war taking place. I think what needs to happen now, and I think the big logjam is, of course, the response from the Iran has legitimate grievances here because there was a nuclear agreement in place and Trump tore that up and he put crippling sanctions on Iran. So Iran has, I think, legitimate reasons to be skeptical of Trump's offer of negotiations and peace. So I think what we need is a middle some sort of mediation here, some sort of diplomacy. I'm not sure if the French, who are proposing some sort of peace plan, can play that role. That remains to be seen. All of the key players will be in the same building in New York this week. So there's some hope that perhaps this logjam, this problem can be unraveled, but I remain very skeptical.
Earlier, European countries had been trying to play their part, and particularly when we saw that at the G7 summit, the Iranian Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif was invited by French President Emmanuel Macron. We'll come back to this, Mr. Nader. For now, Mr. Khalid, or do you think that angry rhetoric and the contradictory statements by President Trump have added fuel to fire and aggravated the situation in the Middle East?
Well, I think yes, as our friend said, there's utter confusion because every day foreign policies projects are tweeted. I've never seen this kind of thing for a long time. I would think also Trump is much less hostile than Bolton, and I think that his offer of a phone number in Geneva or the offer to meet the Iranians should have been taken because it opens a very small nook and allows the door to be open. I think there is no alternative to face-to-face negotiations, and I don't know what the Iranian stand on this is, but I truly believe that all this drama can end if people sit and talk to each other. Unfortunately, there has been intransigence from both sides and all kinds of statements coming out. But if any government wants the goodwill of its own people and avoid a war that is going to be catastrophic, not only to the area, but to the world. And I think it's important that the leaders also in Iran, I mean, there is the pride and it's there in this part of the area. But I think when Trump can meet the North Korean leader, and I think there should be a meeting, and as was said, they're all in the same building, and there is nothing to prevent them from just sitting and going across and having a cup of coffee and at least start. Any meeting will sort of make people less tense because there is a lot of tension in the area.
Obviously, you have mentioned that if all the world leaders and particularly these stakeholders sit down in the same building when the United Nations General Assembly session is underway, so it could be a very particular moment, an important moment to avoid a big war in the Middle East. So when we talk about these Saudi officials that have said that if the attacks on the oil installations are proven against Iran, the kingdom can take the appropriate measures against Iran. So when they talk about the appropriate measures, So, Mr. Khalid, what do you think what those appropriate measures could be?
I don't speak for them, but I don't think so that at any stage there is something like war clouds being set up or something, because as I said, the kingdom has been extreme. I mean, look, this is like a September 11 for us. It's been a great hit. Now, where it came from, what is going to happen, what are the consequences, nobody knows. But you cannot violate a country's integrity, economic integrity, and violate its sovereignty by whether it's drones or rockets or even by throwing toothpicks at people. I mean, this is a big thing for Saudi Arabia to lose such a large scale in its oil production. And Saudi Arabia has every right to be upset. Now, we have to find out who are these people who caused this, who are the proxies. I think until that is done, then I think the statement is very apt that we have every right to take whatever appropriate action is. But believe me, let me tell you, here we are not warmongers.
Okay, Mr. Khaled Al Maeena, editor of the Arab News in Saudi Gazette, joining us from Jeddah. Thank you very much for being a part of the Newswire today. Mr. Mostafa, in case of any proof that Iran was directly involved, as the Saudi officials have said that they will be taking appropriate action against Iran, so do you think Saudi Arabia is in a position to go into a war with Iran?
First of all, it's not logical to think that Iran has been behind this attack. Let's forget all about the animosity of this towards Iran, which puts the truthfulness, veracity, authenticity, and truthfulness of this allegations that they are raising against Iran under question, and think that their allegations are not baseless. Let's think for a moment that they are accusing Iran for true reasons. Now, what would it mean? The United States has dozens of bases all across the region. It has dozens of warships in the Persian Gulf, each equipped with several defense missile shields that have been posed to Iran, directed at Iran, allegedly to fight the Iranian threat. And then they have tens of thousands of troops. Also, in a second layer, in a third layer of defense, they have hundreds of these Patriot missile shields as well as other types of air defense shields. The allegation that they've been raising against Iran, that Iran has launched such a vast attack involving dozens of missiles as well as drones, would mean that Iran has sent so many drones and missiles over the skies of the Persian Gulf, across the Persian Gulf, flying over all these warships and all these air defense shields, troops, and bases, and has hit all these missiles and the rockets launched by these drones have all hit the target. And none of these U.S. troops, as well as other regional state armies, have none of them has come to intercept even one missile or one drone, or at least trace one of the moves made by these drones and missiles in such a vast attack. Well, that would be a humiliation of the U.S. Army as well as arms manufacturers first, because it would prove that all the U.S. troops as well as warships and weapons are worthless. It means that Iran is so powerful, maybe it has been helped by the Martians, that is in position of such a power that nobody has been able to trace all its flying missiles and drones in such a vast area, 700 kilometers, as they say. So I believe that this is only an allegation in order to accomplish two goals. First, they are trying to escape this embarrassment that they have failed against an empty-handed nation like the Yemenis. First. Second, they are trying to work out some kind of media hype and propaganda against Iran in order to levy political support for their moves against Iran to further isolate Iran. The United States is isolated because of its pull out of the JCPOA. Even the NATO allies have had their grievances against the United States. The U.S. has been condemned by many world nations for tearing apart the nuclear deal, which has come to damage regional peace and security, and its repercussions would be felt by the Europeans if the JCPOA dies completely. So they are trying to promote Iranophobia and gather more political support for their moves against Iran in the Persian Gulf, as well as in this week UN General Assembly meeting to show that they have collected support for their moves against Iran. I do not believe that the Saudis would go for any kind of military option. Neither the Americans would do that. I do believe that...
Mr. Mostafa, thank you very much for joining in the show today, joining us from Tehran, analyzing the situation in the Middle East, and particularly what exactly are the goals of the U.S. and Saudi Arabia when they are accusing of the Iran for the attacks on the oil installations. Mr. Nader, although U.S. has raised its troops in Saudi Arabia, will it be in a position to go into an all-scale war with Iran, especially at a time when it is trying, on the other hand, to get out of wars, particularly from Afghanistan?
Correct. I mean, the mood in the United States and in the White House in particular is against further military involvement in the Middle East or the broader region. I think these recent announcements that the United States is sending more troops to Saudi Arabia, sanctioning Iran again, sending more defense missiles, these are I think, defensive moves, trying to simply reassure Saudi Arabia that they haven't been abandoned. There's no appetite for a wider or expanded war. I'm talking about Trump himself. Many of his close advisors want a war. I mean, John Bolton was a big proponent of that, but thank God he's out of the picture. Pompeo certainly wants a war, but Trump doesn't want one. He's up for re-election, and I don't think as long as he is in charge,
so U.S. doesn't want to go into an war. Mr. Nader Hashmi, the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver and the Middle East expert, joining us from Doha. Thank you very much for being on Newswire today. That's all for now, and we will see you tomorrow with an in-depth analysis of the latest happenings from around the globe. Till then, it's goodbye.